Hey folks, welcome to Ask Strong Towns Anything. This is our weekly session as an opportunity for us to think through many of the challenges that we face in our communities and the specific questions that arise when we, especially as concerned citizens, begin to take note of the things that are happening in our places and ask, so what's the deal with that? Sometimes it's about wanting to learn more. Sometimes it's about wanting to understand how to have the conversation with other people in a way that they will understand, in a way that will be fruitful and helpful and not divisive or ending up creating more controversy than is necessary. The other amazing thing is that it's somewhat like a travel log. We get to go from place to place to place all across North America and even sometimes other parts of the world in order to hear and learn about the context and specific details of troubles that people are facing in their places. And then the realization emerges that so many of these challenges rhyme or echo with the very same things that we face in our place. You might not have the exact issue that somebody is grappling with, but you'll have something similar. And I think that's where we can really benefit when we talk together as Strong Towns members about how to address the challenges that we face in our communities. So thank you for being a Strong Towns member. And let's kick things off with a brand new Strong Towns member, Karina, who is in St. Augustine, Florida, if I remember, somewhere in Florida. And she's brought a question with us with her for today. Karina.
Hey, thank you. Yes, I'm in St. Augustine, Florida, and I have been here for about 7, 8 months. And as I'm getting to know the place and I'm getting really connected in my community, I am curious as I'm watching the growth of this city, how what do you think the best way to get sort of ahead of growth or potentially harmful development, knowing that that's going to occur? Um, I think that the city could really use like an urban design team, or something of the sort. So I'm thinking about I lived in Nashville for 10 years and I'm really clued in on like the progress in Chattanooga. And so I'm thinking about these cities that I watched grow over the last 10, 15 years and knowing that that's going to happen here in St. Augustine. How do we get ahead of that?
So you moved to St. Augustine. Are you just a citizen? Are you a planner? Do you have aspirations to be an elected official?
Um, I am right now just a citizen. I
Okay.
can't even join boards until I've been here for a year, but I will let you know that I'm aware of that. Um, it has, I
Okay.
have
No,
thought about elected official positions, so yeah.
okay.
Mhm.
That helps because I know on this call today we've got representatives from all those groups. When I talk to citizens that as long as we would call strong citizens, so people that are really engaged that want to make their community stronger and more resilient, the the first thing to do is to actually participate in local government. Take the time to show up at city council meetings. Never miss the opportunity to take advantage of public comment. What I have found in my experience of being in City Hall, everybody takes that microphone, that 2 to 3 minutes of fame, and they sit there and they talk about all the things that City Hall is not doing, all the things that are bad and ugly in their community, and it just is noise. It's in Florida, you have lots of public comments, so it could be hours of noise. But showing up and identifying yourself as a citizen, sharing what you love about your community, the things you see in St. Augustine that you like, even if you have to squint to find the things you like, to take the time to put it in that construct is really important. Um, that is something that most elected officials do not hear. They never hear those complimentary pieces. That begins a conversation. What you'll find is others will start to say, "Oh, I like that park too. Oh, I really love that particular street," or "I love the architecture of this location." Um, People will migrate to that positivity. It'll also show that you're willing to kind of put that time in. The next tier of things to do within your community is start gathering with others about that. We have a local conversations program. The local conversations program is when several Strong Towns members want to get together and meet on a regular basis in a community. Um, we provide that as a structure and provide you the tools to learn how to gather, to learn how to communicate, and then learn how to advocate. So working through all those steps, that's kind of the next group. There may already be a group like that in St. Augustine. Sometimes it's a bike pedestrian oriented group. Sometimes it's a civic group. There's still garden clubs in parts of Florida, maybe that type of group. These are folks that are meeting together on a regular basis and working towards improving and making their communities better. The local conversations, one of the trainings that we share in that program is as you get together and meet in the coffee shop, the bar, the restaurant, wherever it is on the regular basis, take the time in those meetings to give back. So in Bloomington, Illinois, they when they started out as a local conversation, they didn't know what to do, and they told everybody, well, let's go to Habitat and work on homes that Habitat's building to give back. And Habitat said, well, they had all these volunteers show up, and they said, where do you come from? And he gave them an opportunity to talk about strong towns and why they were there. We've had other groups that have gone out and done trash cleanups and cleaning off sidewalks, those different things. So that starts to build that community of folks together. And that's a tool we have with that. Florida also has regional planning councils. The best one in Florida, and I'm going to brag on them because I worked with them quite a bit when I was in Florida, is the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. And they teach everybody else in Florida how to do this work. And they have a design component in their regional planning council. So in the state of Florida, there's a series of them all throughout the state. You can find them pretty easily. They are there to help with providing that technical support within a community, um, when they're doing comprehensive plans, when they're doing long range visioning, or if they're working on redevelopment areas. They provide that support as a regional governmental agency. In that authority, they have the ability to support design and hire architects, and they have many designers and planners there. They are a great resource to go to in the state because they're speaking the state language. They can communicate to planners. Their boards are filled with elected officials, and elevating their work, sharing that work is important. So there are some of those tools, but getting engaged, like you've talked about, is really important. Sharing these pieces, and if we can help you find other folks in St. Augustine that want to get together and talk about this and advance that. The local conversations program is the framework to help you with that, and happy to provide you all those types of resources. But sharing and communicating, starting from a positive perspective, I have found to be most successful for citizens. And now that might lead you into all of a sudden getting a position on a board, all of a sudden supporting political candidates, advocating for work in your community. But but that is the groundwork. I don't know, Norm, if you have some other thoughts of where that work could start.
Yeah, the work of starting it, I think, is also identifying in the community what are the things that we value together. One of the challenges that we certainly saw in Lake County was the number of places that were already entitled for thousands and thousands more housing units to go in. And one of the things that were also where there was no opportunity for any, like that cat was out of the bag. They really were not going to submit to any sort of design review. And so you're just going to get more of the same, which was suburban sprawl. We also have seen that with a lot of projects where the quest for the city to have everything be just so ends up really bogging things down. So I know that our urban design standards in the city that I live are very ignorant of the fact that much of the attraction has to be at the street level. Sort of that first and second story is where a lot of the interest and sort of the experience of walking through a place, and then the rest doesn't even matter. And so we've had standards in our city where you need to hide the fifth and sixth stories. And as a result, you don't have penthouses. You have these sort of like wedding cake style designs that don't work because the premium units that are supposed to cover the cost of the rest of the structure are the ones that we then say, no, you need to reduce the square footage on them. You need to make that a lot smaller. In that context, trying to say, how do we get back into a situation where we're not doing bad design? I think there's the guarding against sort of the subjective, well, I don't like it. But this is where I think Strong Towns has a very tight kinship with the revival of like not just classic architecture, but sort of the rejection of modern architecture, in part because of the concern like these buildings don't work for people. And so I think that can sometimes be the we like this, we don't like this, can be very valuable in helping a place to document like this is beautiful or this is like meaningful. We would love to see more development occur like this. I know that in Bothell, Washington, for example, the Bopop group is a local conversation group there. And one of the things that they were doing is they were challenging the city to work locally with local developers. The council was on a quest to basically sell off a ton of public land because they were trying to balance their budgets. And they were selling to developers out of Texas, out of other places. And the trouble is they were getting Texas styled architecture. And they just said, is there any way that we can break up these blocks? Is there any way that we can promote a more fine-grained urbanism? That is all like part of the value declaration of what your community wants together. It's that dual recognition. One, the cat is out of the bag on a lot of these projects that you're just going to see go through, and they're the ones you just take it. And then the rest are the ones where you say, hey, we have a new opportunity here. We can do something fresh or more engaging. And that's where I think some of the insights of the newer urbanists can be really useful of like what makes a great street isn't necessarily like a pinnacle building. It's just a good doorway. It's a good interface between the private to the public realm. And so I think that that would be an element of this. The other area is getting people to do the math. If we think of harmful development from the perspective of we can't afford to keep doing this, almost every city and municipality across the country is grappling with the fact that they are committed to continuing a pattern of suburban development that they know is irresponsible, or many know is irresponsible, and we can't afford to do that. So if that's the language, I noticed in your question, you sort of paired urban design with harmful development. So that's where on the question of like, are these people-oriented places, really giving people the language to use when we say this is why this building works or this is why this space is really poor for people. But then the other side is this impoverishing our community? Might be one of those things you can work with others that are financially savvy to say, hey, can we run the numbers on our newer developments? Are they paying their way? Urban 3 has some great resources. I'll link a couple of like how to do a spot by spot sort of analysis of residences in a place, because that can be one of those ways too, where you say, our bottom line will suffer if we continue to proceed in this way. Edward, do you want to briefly share, and then I'll take note of some of the things in the chat as well. But just what we were seeing in Lake County and their mapping out of their development sort of plans and the long-term fiscal cliff that they were, or conundrum they were creating for themselves.
Yeah. So when you look at the value per acre, when you look at productivity of land, we spent some time in Claremont, Florida, and looked at the value per acres. In Florida, all of your counties do a really good job of mapping the assessed value of properties. The data is easy to get. It's on their website. It's in a Google map type format, and you can collect certain properties in town. The conversation that they were having in Claremont is that they were in this, they believed they needed to go and approve and build all the stuff on the edge of town, that they needed to go and see all of that growth occur because of they needed to have all those transactions. And they saw their downtown as a draw. They saw their downtown as the place that had the blight, that had all the places that needed more police services, more code enforcement, is where people complain about parking. On the edge of town, everybody was super happy. They moved into their new subdivisions. We did a simple analysis with some citizens in Claremont, and we looked at a vacant lot that one would say is blighted. It's been marked as that. It's in the redevelopment area. It had a for sale sign in it with a phone number, and it was in Google Street View for several years there. So it had been sitting in that area. And we looked at the assessed value and divided the value by acre. And then we went out to the new subdivisions, the places that were the desirable areas that were all in the marketing brochures. And we found that the brand new homes in those subdivisions, just lot to lot comparison, the brand new homes were generating a value per acre uh, less than half of the vacant lot in the middle of their downtown. Meaning the accrued value and wealth built in the city is actually in the downtown. When we looked at vacant properties and we looked at, they had done some redevelopment, some really cool redevelopment in downtown Claremont. They got lots of pushback because it was new and it was going to be too dense. If you look at downtown Claremont in the middle, there's a cool soda shop. It's an alley type condition. They revitalized some buildings. When we look at the value per acre of that and the productivity of that, it was 10 or 15 times of any other new development in town. When we looked at the overall county, we found that the corner building that was 2 stories, that had the revolving ground floor retail that was going out, we found that that was actually the most productive parcel in all of Lake County. And we challenged the folks in Lake County to find a more productive site. When we started talking about productivity in Lake County, this is a language that their county commission speaks. This is the language their elected officials and residents speak. And it shifted their conversation about how they talk about development when they started to see what the real costs were. Now, all their city councils knew it was more expensive to do stuff on the edge of town. They had more maintenance. It was farther for public works and police to go out to. They had to upgrade all their utility systems to support all of that new stuff. Meanwhile, in the middle of downtown, all they were doing were sidewalks and street projects. Again, expensive, but a higher rate of return. So doing some of the value per acre work, you can do it lot by lot. We were inspired to do that work from the work of Urban 3. Just doing numbers, because numbers are agnostic, we can look to see where the higher productivity is. And time again, the nurturing of the infills, the redevelopment of the stuff closer to the center of town where utilities and roads already exist, it doesn't take very much to yield high returns for a municipality compared to that expansive, explosive growth you see on the edge. In Lake County, they're beginning to talk about what it really costs to put stuff on the edge and how they can stop subsidizing that work, getting rid of the subsidies for that edge condition and actually focusing on how can we nurture things in the middle of the downtown. So Florida is a fascinating place because your data is so readily available. And we've got a couple of, if I know for sure we did an example in Lake County in the Lake County Community Action Lab. We did a video to show people how to do it with their mapping system. And I think almost all the counties in Florida use generally the same software. But we also have some other links that we have with showing people how to do value per acre. So that is just another tool just to show people. And as a citizen, you can sort of raise those questions about that, asking what is the fiscal health of, of this? What is the fiscal return of this new development? We're not going to talk about the gates. We're not going to talk about them all being the same architecture. We don't have to talk about it all being one builder. We can just talk about what the long-term impacts that is a fascinating conversation that we have found resonates really well in Florida. And Thousand Friends of Florida have funded a lot of work for the Urban 3 to explain that in Florida. Um, and it shifts when you find out in Claremont and in Groveland, Florida, both in Lake County, when we asked the development community why they weren't investing in the middle of the downtown, they said that's where we want to be. But your application process to develop a 50 by 100-foot lot is equivalent to doing a 200-acre subdivision. So why would we spend all of that time to do traffic studies and public hearings and development and architectural reviews for one building when we could spread that over the 200-acre subdivision and hundreds of homes? And that has shifted the way places like Groveland and Claremont are thinking about in their downtowns. We already know where the roads are. We know we're not going to build any more, so we don't do the traffic study. It's such a small postage stamp. Do we really need to do all of the stormwater management stuff? and all those calculations. We know what it is because we've already calculated that in the downtown. We just need to be sure we're grading in the right way. So breaking down those barriers, I'm going to make it easier to build where they want building to occur. And that's another approach from a citizen perspective of just filling out an application and showing where it's most cumbersome. That starts another really interesting conversation in the community. So Karina, I think we've given you lots and lots of things, challenged you to do a bunch of stuff. Um, but don't be a stranger if there are things as you're going out there and exploring and want to dive deeper. Feel free to reach out to Norm or myself. Would love to see what you're doing in St. Augustine over the next couple of months.
Yeah,
Mhm.
thank you both so much.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
this is you've given me enough homework till at least August 20th when I come back with
Perfect.
other questions.
Yeah, love it. That's great. Yeah, Richard, go ahead.
Hey, good morning. Karina, in terms of you have to be a resident for a year to join, does that include all volunteer positions or assigned, where you apply and here, I'll just jump to find out if you can just sit in and listen. And during that first year, if you can be just an observer in the room, sometimes you're not allowed to speak during the meetings or whatever, but you would just get, get up to speed as quickly as possible before you could go official. So, yeah.
I would say that that's a very common path that I've encountered quite a few people that have ended up in elected office, in part because they were the people that did take note. And pretty quickly, even just by attending, you start to understand who are some of the key players, who are some of the key people that help, but also who are some of the folks that should not be there any longer, and that can create the resolve to just like power up either the campaign for somebody else or the encouragement for in time yourself to run for that. So exciting. But Edward and we always have this challenge. On the one hand, I would love to have us have just a 1 hour conversation about this, and maybe we should just set aside a whole day for that. But we're going to pick up the question that Kelly has submitted, and then Kelly, if you want to jump in as well, I'll have Edward offer a few comments just to begin, and then take it away. So I'm going to drop in the chat the question, or the link rather, that Kelly shared with us about the Arizona Supreme Court's ruling that expanded abilities to basically recall projects or turn back projects that had been previously approved by local municipalities, and asking the question, how does this decision affect Strongtown's goals, especially in areas that are experiencing rapid growth? Even to then ask the follow-up question, does Strongtowns need to play a role in helping craft legislation to ensure infrastructure planning aligns with its principles? Edward, do you want to take on a couple of early thoughts, and then we'll throw it over to Kelly. And Kelly, if you want to sort of expand on that, and then we'll have a little discussion together.
Yeah. So in this article, this is like fascinating. It's a fascinating article and case study. So in Arizona, a community went out and they have a 4-lane road to the middle of their downtown. They spent 5 years ago, spent a lot of time, probably a bunch of capital, bunch of um, public meetings to develop a plan to do kind of a road diet, to reduce some lanes, increase on-street parking, widen the sidewalks, all of that work. Time goes by, like with all these projects, they wait till the funding is available, and the city goes and finds a federal grant to help them construct this new street, this walkable street through their downtown. The grant is a $5 million federal grant with a $5 million local match. Citizens show up and they say, whoa, wait a minute, we didn't know this was happening. What is it? What do you mean you're going to reduce lanes? What do you mean you're going to slow traffic? What do you mean you're spending money? All those things come up and they create a super PAC and sue the city, which is not uncommon. There's lots of places that have sued on roadway components. I don't know Arizona law as well as other places. I'm not an attorney, but I find it really fascinating that this federal judge determined that um, the the Supreme Court ruling said that citizens have the ability to go out and challenge their local jurisdiction, to challenge their components because The initiative to do this roadway project was legislative in nature, and in Arizona, like many of the other states, that legislative action can be challenged by citizens, so they could go out and do a referendum to kill the project. And so now that that's been set, the super PAC is going out to kill the project. So that kind of sets the stage. We've all had the projects in our community that I think we've identified we wish were stopped. So when I look at this piece, the first thing that I see from that is that this, from a Strong Towns perspective, is a tool that communities could actually use to stop the types of development that is inconsistent with their local values. We've seen this in other states. In Wisconsin, there was lawsuits from Thousand Friends and some of the other environmental groups against highways there. In Texas, there's a bunch of lawsuits against the expansion of Highway 35. So there's those pieces to it. So I find that just really fascinating, geeking out about law and decision making and those components. If I look about that from a Strong Town side, there's Strong Towns could have a couple of different perspectives on it. This type of project is a giant leap. This is a big comprehensive project. It impacts a lot of property owners. It is in a cycle of highway, just as we would use, this is the same process for highway expansion as it is for roadway reduction. When we talk about adding lanes to a highway, it's the same process you go through to reduce the amount of lanes. So we're in that same structure because that's how we have set up this machine of infrastructure. If I look at this and we think through it, we should pause and really think about these giant leaps and these all-encompassing projects. Even though it may be a perfect project, I don't know who designed it. I don't know who the engineers are. I don't know what is designed in those pieces and all the stuff. It may be perfect. But in many of these big projects, there is not a feedback loop that if we find imperfection in the project for us to change that. And I resonate and fully hear residents that are very opposed to change. When we talk about roadways and we talk about development, we've had 8 decades of proven practice of development that has not been responsive to our local jurisdictions, has pushed agendas that don't match local values, and has resulted in things that are less valuable, less lovable than what was there before. So there's this natural caution and hesitation. So what do we do? I think from a legal side, I think this is going to be really interesting, especially on development approvals. There's the whole series of questions about takings. If a community approves something and a developer moves forward on it, and then there's a referendum that moves it back, you have taken something, you've caused damage to a developer. What do we do? On this particular project, I don't think any of these federal grants are set up in a way to give them back, or the money that has been spent to date of getting all of this stuff together, now that it's been killed or has a potential to be killed, how do you deal with that? If it's a referendum, the city actually can't go out and lobby for the for this roadway project. This becomes now a political realm that they can't go in, so it puts cities at a problem. So I think all that really interesting, and all of our Arizona folks, I'm curious hearing what you all are hearing on the ground with that. I'm sure the League of Cities and municipal leagues all over um, the country will want to chime in on this and dive into these pieces. Let me talk about how how we could think about this differently from a Strong Town side. When we think about the Strong Towns approach, it's not about giant leaps. It's about incrementally investing and developing. It's about thinking about that next smallest step. I don't have to do a whole lot of thinking about a road project that um, right sizes lanes, that focuses on safety, that increases sidewalks, that help to make an area more walkable and safer for all users. Like those are things we should do. But how can we do that instead of as a legislative action? How could we do that as a maintenance action in a community? What are the things? Maybe it's not going to be for whatever it is. Maybe it's not a mile of roadway, but what if we start at one intersection, at one block, at one location to try something to build trust? Those are things that we're seeing cities all across North America when they identify a safety issue or draw on economics or a need to build confidence in the community. They're making small steps. And instead of spending $5 million, what could they do with $5,000 or $500 in maintenance on a maintenance side to address a safety maintenance issue to build that up? That's so I'm curious, Kelly, if there's anything that you're hearing on the ground or cities are running to the windows and rooftops on this. And I know Jean's on here too. She's also in Arizona and might have some input on what she might be hearing on the ground as well.
I actually haven't heard very much from people on the ground. In our Discord, Strong Towns Phoenix chapter, they talked a little bit about how this could be used like to benefit people who wanted to stop, road widening projects and stuff. So I'm really curious to see how this is going to affect things going forward. One of the, like their public policy or their initiative was preserving Lake Powell Boulevard as it existed on October 1st, 2023. And it's like, was their law actually written to say it can never change? And how detailed was that? Does that mean that there can never be a park bench put somewhere? Did that mean that there can never be a stop sign or versus a light? Does that mean it must stay in stasis at the way it is forever? And like, how did that law like really affect that? I was just fascinated. I was like, saw that article and I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be huge. And this really affects strong towns. And yeah, the way that we're attempting to go about, helping our cities become better and small incremental changes. I mean, yeah, this is very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it would put fear in me if I was in City Hall on the decisions we're making because
Yeah,
I don't know how
definitely.
to counter a super PAC because it's like these are funded advocacy organizations that are using the legal method to go forward. And if you're in an adversarial position of writing this up, and I've seen this in different states where there's voter referendums that get written and they're well intentioned but poorly written because they're not people that write policy and land use laws. So yeah, those questions come up. If it's, are we locking it in time? Could I not ever go out and deal with a stormwater
Yeah,
project there? Um,
definitely. And
and
it,
this
it
is,
was it was just fascinating because it was if they just understood a little bit more of the financials of it, maybe they wouldn't have fought it so hard.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are a city leader I mean, I think in the article it mentioned they spent like 8 years working on this project and attempting to get the funding for this project and so on and so forth. And it's like, so if you're a city person and you spend years of your life attempting to make changes slowly, and then all of a sudden they say, nope, we decide we don't like it. What are we going to do?
and this is for roads. Imagine you have that next development that comes. I'm a private developer and I'm coming forward making an investment, and it doesn't matter what development, but I'm making an investment. And now there is this action that they've determined that through the planning process, it's a legislative decision because the council approved it or they deferred it to the planning commission. And at some point, it could go for referendum. I don't know how far, like, I think at this point they've got the money out for this roadway project, but what if it was under construction? Um, what if the development
Definitely.
was already built and now the referendum comes up? Like, where is the statute of stopping this? And you are at the mercy of your citizens to make that decision now. Um, it, it's tough. So I think the attorneys are going to have a field day of trying to figure this out.
This one's gonna be a doozy.
And one of the challenges is that the courts will be asked repeatedly to begin to weigh in on whether or not there's a reasonable way in which this new standard, if it passes, as I understand it, still would have to go through a ballot and be approved. But if it were to pass, then there's always the sort of reasonable ways in which this could be expected to be construed. So a bench somehow would get approval, but bike lane would not. And you create this real situation where if we take seriously that our citizens are co-owners of a shared project, then we genuinely do want to allow for even errors that we would perceive to be just like a pig self-own to actually be something that we worked our way through. The core element is how to avoid it from becoming so drawn out that it just creates two camps. I often look, whenever there's a pack involved, it's often a consequence of very weak muscles on the part of everybody else around, because it's sort of a predatory system that preys on weakness in the political process rather than evidence that they're up against it. They don't go where there's strength typically. And so this is one of those sort of indicators that there's room for a local conversation. There's room for some of these genuinely citizen-led sort of projects to begin to reshape and define what it is for the community to define as co-owners. What do we want of these spaces? Two other quick thoughts is that on the question of would strong towns play a role in helping craft legislation, strong towns members absolutely can and should. Strong towns as an organization doesn't roll out model legislation. We've toyed with that at various times. We've thought about, for example, statements or resolutions that local councils could pass to designate themselves as not being in favor of highway expansion near them. And that requesting that, for example, their engineering program only work on projects that are already within the scope of their work, and not even engage in exploratory processes to engage with the state on whether or not the next round of expansion should include their city, or at minimum to notify council when that occurs. We've grappled with that, and I think the where we're at now is that we still don't have the resources or the ability at the local level to actually be able to do that well. But this is where the amazement in my mind is often when I see what people share internally with as strong towns members. Are like, well, I created this, and I think that this could apply in so many other places. And that is sometimes the real genius of what our strong towns members are capable of and really building on. And then the last thing is that there is the article references the fact that there was a mine closure, significant employment leaving the community, and as a consequence, this sort of all eggs in the single basket of let's just make our street a little bit more vital. It really can obscure and the idea that we actually need to do a whole suite of different small things to make our place a lot more vital. And so the example I offered of Reimagine Elmwood is a neighborhood in Winnipeg that has Henderson Highway blasting right through it. It's not properly a highway, but it's a 6-lane strode. And in that context, they didn't say, all right, we need to we need to just close this. They've done a couple of demonstration projects. They've created a little parklet that is right next to it. They're planning to do a crash analysis studio where several cars have left the road and been driven right into buildings. They are doing a lot of small things, including very simple like placemaking things, like they installed large giant marbles that local kids had decorated. And what they were doing there is they were saying this place matters and this place is for us. They installed signage that overhangs the roadway at some height, but that all of a sudden now you've entered into Elmwood, and we know that that can also create a sense of place. And over time, it will become compelling enough that the lane reduction will start to make sense. And then the last piece that I encountered when I was in Michigan was community members that said, we have this strode, how do we unstrodify it? But the reality is that strode actually needed to function like a road, connecting core elements of the community. And so there was a need for, as mentioned in the article, RVs and other large vehicles to pass through. but there's so much more that can be done on the perpendiculars, not on the strode itself, but at each of those, you identify where are your core intersections and actually have the development you want to see bleed out away from the strode rather than along the strode. And this can be that challenge when people look at a corridor that simply has too much noise, too much travel infrastructure already built into it, and they say, okay, let's just get rid of all that. And very logically, people will balk at that and say that doesn't work. But if we say at this intersection, we can make one of these intersections really good, where you're not having to stop every 10 meters because we've done more mid-block crossings. We've actually almost given up on that strode. It will be in its strode-like environment, but we're going to make sure some of our core perpendiculars begin to actually radiate out, which requires, and this is a great economic development strategy, which requires that adjacent residences be eligible for conversion into commercial units. Be eligible, not have to, but maybe. And this is where you see in older communities that house that became a doctor's office, that other house that has, you know, a garage in the back and a pharmacist up front. Like, that was actually not the original intent of the plan. And yet that is what that allowing the perpendicular sort of spaces adjacent to a strode, but not on the strode, to actually become more lively. And over time, that would be how you can create a great connection point. We see this in a lot of our original communities that have railroads running through them. The development did not follow the railroad. It went out from the station, away from the railroad. If we can begin to embrace strode repair in our communities, not by saying we need to fix the entire strode, but by actually beginning to say, let's use that road connection to now connect productive intersections that bleed out into the existing neighborhoods, that can be another tool that can be helpful. And so I definitely want to highlight the fact, so I love your question, Karina, asking, hey, where's everybody from? What do you all do? And then a bunch of you, I'm just going to highlight this because this is good for YouTube as well. A bunch of you have said, oh, I'm just a citizen. You are much more than just a citizen. You're so much more. You're a co-owner of your community. I'm not saying that to correct you. I'm saying that to celebrate what you are, because we at times as Strong Towns members will say, well, you know, I face this all the time. I look in the mirror and I don't have a planning degree. I'm not an architect. You know, I get to hang out with some people who are, and they're amazing. And we definitely need them. We need elected officials. We need concerned citizens, and we need technical professionals all doing this work together. And so I dropped in the chat, but for those that didn't see it, to be just something is a word that carries so much weight around here, because we are doing this work together and really building stronger communities with this. Our second question is, Kelly, awesome question. We're going to go on to the second question from Michael about urban form and transportation access, and whether policy should require new developments to be denser, including mixed use from the outset, being designed to be much more capable of providing sort of village center amenities, all of those different types of things, along with transit access. Michael, do you want to introduce the question a little further, and then we'll dive into it and have a discussion here?
Sure. I kind of try to remember what I said, but basically, nowadays the subdivisions that they're wanting to develop are so huge, they're almost like little towns. And so I was thinking, what if we should make a law, a rule, whether it's a county or a state or whatever, you get past a certain amount of land mass that you have to not just make a flood of houses, you have to leave spaces for future schools and shopping. But go ahead and develop that massive land as a little town in itself. Don't just come up and here, I got a 500 acres of just floods of houses. Here I have now 500 acres of an actual town with a neighborhood here and a neighborhood there, and anyway, that's the gist of the question.
Yeah.
Have government agencies require subdivisions or just huge land masses they have to incorporate shopping, all the utilities, and more local concentrated neighborhood. Basically, you want to build a small town. That was basically it.
Maybe I'll pick this up first, and then Edward and others as well. But this is certainly the principles of new urbanism loom large here. I think that beginning to identify these things as profitable is the next step of it. And so in my community, we have Southlands, which was initially proposed as greenfield development on an agricultural area. They made basically land swaps and all sorts of stuff like that. And they had two options. They could do a standard build out of all of the homes, Or they could do something which would be a little bit more complex and opened up their timeline a little bit longer, but actually has resulted in a significant amount of value being delivered to them through the project. And the way that they did that is they created a great urban center. They willingly subsidized the coffee shop, so that way for the first 5 years of its existence, it could just be there, because they said every dollar that we give to the owners or knock off the rent for the owners, we see coming back to us in townhome sales. We see coming back to us in all of the other the prices that our places are gathering. And so they had initially thought that their little courtyard cottages would sell for about 700,000, which is insane. But that's the world that I live in. And that's even, that is Canadian dollars, but still that is a lot of money. And now they're selling for almost a million, $1,000,001, because people say it's desirable. I want to live there. However, getting your DR Hortons, your other big builders to really grapple with the idea that they've been leaving value on the table, I think is one of those things that's really hard for them to see. They are very used to sort of a monocrop agricultural sort of model. You go in, you moonscape it, you do all your prep, you put in your corn, you wait for the crop, and then you leave. And it really lacks the vitality of what if we use the agricultural metaphor, permaculture recognizes, oh, what I do in year 1 should definitely seed the ground for a much more vital year 2, year 3, year 4, with fewer inputs required as we go along. In traditional villages or village design has much the same characteristics to it, that it really does grapple with the idea that, oh, by actually building out the things that people need, as well as providing work opportunities, Seaside, for example, as one, famous, even if it's contested example down in Florida, what they are doing there, we have not, at least to my knowledge, we have not yet seen, aside from things like form-based code, a real grappling with what to do about that. At most, what we've been able to help promote is the idea that you need to do the math on these new types of development, and when they are shown to be inadequate, that you should not proceed with them. So the BC government, for example, in British Columbia here, introduced the community life cycle cost calculator, and that might be one of those tools that really helps with this, because the community life cycle cost calculator looks over 100 years at how this will affect the community, what the longer term implications will be. And that can be useful when it comes to accounting for costs of pipes, of roadways, of school access, of all of those different types of things. Depending on where you're situated, I'm trying to remember, are you in Portland or
Sacramento?
Sacramento. So there we go. That is going to be the challenge that I think in existing neighborhoods, there's still so much of, there's a ton of pressure to have mixed use developments. My concern is that that mixed use is still stacked, segregated uses, lacking the ability for some of that to shift and to evolve over time. But at minimum, in our existing neighborhoods, we're beginning to see the emergence of more requirement for that. A lot of the greenfield development work that's happening, especially on the outskirts of communities, is just the same playbook, and it's ruining our places, but not making very livable and humane in that way. I was down in Santa Clarita. They built 3,000 homes along I-5 and not a stick of retail, not a stick of even allowed office work, except for if you don't have anybody showing up at your office. And that the kicker was the only way to get to services, you had to hop on the freeway. So that interstate that Eisenhower paid for is now being asked to serve as a local backbone of people getting to the things that they need. It's lunacy, and yet we keep doing that. But before I fall off my soapbox, Edward?
Yeah, no, this is a really interesting way to think through this. And there's a couple of graphics we share a lot. This is the traditional development pattern, and this is if you read in the Bottom Up Revolution book, or you follow what the traditional development pattern, Chuck talks about Brainerd and its incremental growth over time. In that traditional development pattern, slowly over time, the private investment occurs and builds out these areas. They're not dependent on any external subsidies. So you see that when the first wooden shacks get built, the first housing that gets built in those areas, after they get built, the fire brigade comes in. After some shops come in, then you get water and sewer. Once you get a critical mass of a community, then you start to get the public library. When we were doing work in Florida, a lot of folks are saying, look, we've got this great thing. We can do new urbanism, we can do codes, we could require all of those town things in our subdivisions. But we're going to use our modern development pattern to speed that up. So we see the suburban pattern where in the neighborhoods you're describing, we build everything up front. We build all the roads, the water, the sewer. We require all the stormwater, all that up front. And then you see the things that come in, the big box retail, the fast food, the housing subdivisions, and we fall behind. So in Florida, when they were talking to us, is that we've got codes. We're going to do exactly what Michael, what you're describing. We're going to require all those things up front. It is not connected to the infrastructure discussion. So we're going to require everything up front. We're going to code it for everything up front, and we're still going to require all that infrastructure. And what we found in those Florida communities is when you go and require all that stuff up front, you may get a mix of housing in the first years. You may get your town center early on in the process. But what we're finding is that return on investment, that public investment, is not matching what we have invested. And they kept telling us in Florida that, oh, well, we'll add an additional tax or an assessment over it. And we found that just kind of like runs the bottom up the gamut. When we start talking about development and we start talking about wherever it is, whether it is in the core of our downtown, whether it's on the edge of the city, we should be thinking about it in the terms of the traditional development pattern. That's different than what coding allows us to do. So we should be thinking about how can we see development. Somebody wants to develop a big community on the edge of town. Great. There are many places we need new downtowns, new centers. We should allow that. But we need to recognize that the first phase of that, without any subsidy, is going to look like small wooden shacks. There are going to be more dirt and gravel roads than paved roadways. There are not going to be any traffic lights. It's going to be four-way stops. A lot of the new urbanist communities, the new town development, you'll see in their first phases that there's lots of alleys that have gravel on it. There's lots of stormwater that's in open swales and not pipes in their first phase. It's kitschy and cute, but it's actually following that traditional development pattern. Then what coding doesn't normally allow, as we think through this in that traditional pattern, is over time, how do we start to transition those wooden shacks to 2- and 3-story buildings? How do we allow by right that next increment of development to thicken up before we start thickening out? So I'm always hesitant on new development. I'm really hesitant when we code that for edge conditions because we build things to a finished state. But the real expense out there is the underlying infrastructure that we're requiring to be built all at once before we build the first structure. And I know you're really in tune to some of that infrastructure stuff. So, like, I'm trying to figure out if somebody's going to build a new town, instead of coding the mixed use and defining the town center and the variety of housing types, how do we do the first tier of infrastructure that can actually be maintained with the first tier of development? So whatever roadway, pipes, stormwater we require somebody to build, how could the first 50 homes of that subdivision or that neighborhood or new town actually generate the tax base to fund that? And it's going to look more like dirt and gravel roads. They're not going to be the sidewalks. You're going to have open swales and that type of stuff. How do we build that? Which is like heresy in the development community. And I'm sure everybody that's on this that is regulatory on planning side, it thinks I'm talking crazy because we've had too many developers that do the least amount possible to get across the bar. But I'm thinking about this, how do we think about it from a fiscal model of a development that if it grows over time, it can actually be self-supporting from the revenue it generates in the land value? Those are the things that keep me up at night. And I get long debates with my colleagues about.
We are at the top of the hour, but Edward, why don't you kick us out with a quick description of the accelerator and quick pitch?
yeah, I want to close out today. And I know Michael's here and Yamani's here, who were part of our previous accelerator courses. RL's here. He's not only is he a member of our cohorts program, he's going to be joining us on our next accelerator program. At Strong Towns, we have received lots and lots of questions from members. Like every week, we get lots of them. We've tried to provide this outlet in our weekly Ask Strong Towns Anything, but many of you want to dive deeper. Many of you need the additional help to tackle that struggle in your community. Uh, we have created an accelerator program to help individuals in the most local level to advance and take on all the struggles in your community. It's a 12-week program. We're starting that in September, so there it is open for everybody to sign up for. Chuck and I will be leading that 12-week course. We meet every other week, so 6 in-person sessions. We're going to go through chapter by chapter the bottom-up revolution book. We're going to go through all of those aspects of Strong Towns 101. We're going to talk about how to do value per acre analysis. We're going to help you create action plans to address those struggles and teach you the 4-step process for public investment in your community. If that is something you have an interest in, if you go to strongtowns.org/accelerator, you can learn all about the program. If you have questions about it and you say, I'm not sure I'm the right person for it, I assure you, you are, but I'm happy to get on a phone call with you and talk through that to you know, tell you what we're doing in that particular course. You can email me anytime at edward@strongtowns.org. I'm happy to set up a call with you and walk through it. There are probably people in your community that you wish knew this stuff or could experience it and want to go through that 12-week program. Would love to have them. You don't have to be a member to be part of Accelerator. We hope you become a member as part of it, but I would encourage all of you to do it. If there's a barrier other than your time to keep you from joining the Accelerator program, and that is something you want to do, email me or email Norm or Carly, because if you have an interest in doing it, I want to make sure you have the opportunity to. So I would check that out. And we've got some incredible people that have participated today that have been part of our program. And they can speak to that. You can reach out to them as well. But I don't want that opportunity to be missed by anybody that is part of these Ask Strong Towns Anything. I think it's a powerful opportunity to really advance and accelerate the work you all are doing in your communities.
Awesome. Thanks, Edward. And we've definitely covered quite a bit of ground all the way from Arizona to Florida, all the way out to Sacramento. So, and it's so awesome to be able to connect with each one of you today in this way. And then let's keep this up. So next week, we're back in action. I'll mention as well that one of the things that has come through in the survey that I did share with a whole bunch of the folks that have been participating in Ask Strong Towns Anything was the most frequent bit of feedback was, can we know ahead of time what's coming up in terms of questions and in terms of even the theme or the topic? That requires a lot of us, but it's actually something we definitely want to do. And it's just a matter of committing ahead of time what the theme of the session will be. My personality is I always love the grab bag sessions, but I know that that can be a little disorienting as we move from one thing to the next. And so we will definitely do our best to try to begin to lay out a calendar, probably starting in September, of what you can expect. The other thing is we have been hounding Chuck to make sure that he carves out more time in his schedule to be one of our hosts for Ask Strong Towns Anything. And so that'll be happening with hopefully monthly frequency. That's definitely in the hopper. That was always envisioned. And so, yeah, we'll definitely be able to do that. Kelly, thanks for the feedback as well. I was just asking Edward if that was useful for him as he was answering, and then also for others that are participating. So
yeah, that was
love that.
definitely perfect to be able to see exactly what I had asked already.
Right.
And then and you're the next guest, Michael, your question, being able to read it and then hear from you as well. That was great. Thank you.
I love that. That's great. Well, I hope that you've all had a great session. Last week I was whitewater rafting, and now I'm stuck in an office chair, but this was good. I really enjoyed it. And so it shows that we can use an hour well, no matter what we happen to be doing with it. So thanks, everybody, and keep doing what you can to build strong towns.